Good morning, school, and welcome to today's reflection section. Let me start by posing a simple question. Who is the most famous person in the world? It may be a politician like former President Trump, or an entrepreneur like Elon Musk, an activist like Greta Thunberg, or a sports person such as Cristiano Ronaldo. It could be a pop star like Beyonce, or it could be an author such as J.K. Rowling. However, if you were to ask this question in 1927, there would only be one answer, and it's the gentleman on screen before you who at one time was the most famous man in the world, and I'm talking about an aviator called Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh is a famous American aviator. He was born in Minnesota in 1902. When one considers the first powered flight was in 1904, the technology and the field of aviation was very much in its infancy when Lindbergh joined the US Air Service in 1924, and then shortly after became a US Air Mail pilot, delivering mail. In fact, you can see the picture here, delivering mail at that time. However, around this time, a New York hotelier, Charles Lindbergh, announced a prize, and it was a $25,000 prize. That's nearly £500,000 in today's money. And the prize was for the first solo non-stop flight between Paris and New York, or vice versa. He was a hotelier. He believed that sailing and cruise ships across the Atlantic was very, very slow, and if aviation could become a thing, it would revolutionise the hotel industry. So he put together this large prize to encourage teams to try and fly across the Atlantic. It was an incredibly dangerous thing to do. Before Lindbergh, 6 different people had died trying to win this prize. And so, as a highly experienced aviator, Lindbergh was in a good position to try and take on this very, very dangerous and challenging expedition. But he needed a plane, and so a specially designed plane was built. It was called the Spirit of St. Louis. It was the most expensive plane in the world at the time. It cost over $10,000 to build, but it was this that Lindbergh hoped was going to see him across the Atlantic, into the record books and into the money. Now, bearing in mind it was the most expensive plane in the world, it's not what you would call luxurious. On the left of your screen here, you should see the cockpit, very, very sparse. Every effort was done to eliminate any excess weight. You will notice that there is no front windscreen. The design of the plane put the gas tanks at the front to try and balance the plane better, which meant that Lindbergh could not see out the front window. There was a small periscope or the side windows. So this was an incredibly difficult and uncomfortable and dangerous thing to do, but this was the limit of technology at that time. If you look at the bottom right, you'll see the aviator watch. This was specially designed for Lindbergh and this expedition. It became a very, very famous watch at the time. On the 20th of May 1927, Lindbergh and the Spirit of St. Louis took off to try and take on this task. The only things he had with him were a bottle of water, a map. There was no GPS in those days, and so it was almost impossible to navigate once you were up above the clouds, and 5 roast beef sandwiches, apparently, and yet it took him 33 hours and 30 minutes, but he did arrive successfully in France. Paris went crazy for Lindbergh. The plane was mobbed at the airport. He became a French and American national hero. He was awarded the Medal of Honor. He was awarded the Légion d'honneur by the French. He was Time Magazine's Man of the Year. There were ticker tape parades in New York. He stood astride the world as the most famous man in the world. There was no one who did not know him. And yet, what we come to see is that fame and fortune is all very well, but for Charles Lindbergh, that fame and fortune came at a terrible cost. So Lindbergh was rich, he was famous, he was a happily married family man, he had the world at his feet. But in 1932, tragedy struck. Perhaps spurred by the thought of large amounts of money, in 1932, his small child was kidnapped from his bedroom. A ransom note was left demanding $50,000. This was a crime that shook the world. It was known as the crime of the century. A young innocent child stolen from his bedroom in the wee small hours. Despite the efforts of the police, the National Guard, private investigators, no sign of Charles Lindbergh could be found. A ransom note, as we said, was delivered and was paid. Unfortunately, a couple of months later, the child's body was found buried in woodland. He had been murdered shortly after being kidnapped. The effects of the kidnapping and the consequences were not just felt by the Lindbergh family. A young woman called Violet Sharp, who was an employee of the Lindbergh household, was questioned by the police. The press, perhaps due to a lack of other suspects, seized upon her. She became notorious, the prime suspect. The press intrusion became so much that she committed suicide on the 10th of June 1932, feeling hounded by the press and the authorities. It was shortly after her death, her alibi was confirmed, and it was clear the poor woman had nothing to do with the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby. In fact, it was the work of a German carpenter who had previously done some work at Lindbergh's house. His name was Bruno Hauptmann. He had it was an opportunistic crime to try and extort money out of the family. Bills that were used as part of the ransom money were found in his possession. He was tried and convicted and executed by electric chair in 1936. And so, despite the celebrity, the fame and the fortune, the story of Charles Lindbergh is actually a story of stark warning about the perils of fame and the tragedy that can bring. Okay, thank you, school.